So far, as we've been working through the Psalms, we're actually not working through the Psalms. We're not going to do all 150. As you may have noticed, I've already skipped quite a few. But we prayed and sung Psalms 1 and 2, which introduced the whole book of the Psalms, which is divided into 5 books with the 150 Psalms. And we were reminded that the first 3 books are dominated by Psalms of lament. Not all Psalms of lament, but dominated by that. And we looked at Psalm 6 as an example of one of those in Book 1. And then last week, we were enlightened by the Basque sheep herder as to some of the literal meaning of what we call the Shepherd's Psalm, Psalm 23. And by the way, there are copies of that article that we read from on the back table, so feel free to take as many as you want, because there are more than there are people here. And I call Psalm 23 a psalm of neither lament or praise, but a psalm of comfort. And by the way, I would recommend that you read a few psalms each day throughout your life, but particularly through this series. And as you read those, either praise God or feel lament with those in this church family or elsewhere in the world who may be feeling either way at this moment in time, because maybe you aren't. And on another day or in another time, you may be the one who needs the prayers of others because you may be feeling one of those ways or the other. But we might be tempted to think that because the Psalms express emotions and we assume that they are inspired or at least approved by the Holy Spirit, then that means that it's all about us, all about how we feel. And God is there to just listen to us, name our emotions, and then make us feel better. Well, let's think about that just a little bit.
Do you know a lot about emotions and feelings? Great! Then you're ready to play Name That Emotion! In this game, we have to figure out what feeling our contestants are feeling. Ready to play? Great! Ovejita, bring in the first contestant! Muy bien! See who it is? It's a chicken! Oh, she's laughing. Miss Chicken, can you describe a little bit about how you're feeling?
I'll try, Murray. Well, it's a really good feeling. I laid this egg and I just can't stop smiling.
It's a really good feeling, and she can't stop smiling. What feeling is the chicken feeling? Happy? You think the chicken is happy? Let's find out. Miss Chicken, are you happy?
Well, as a matter of fact, Murray, I am happy.
We did it! We named that emotion!
Naming my emotion.
Thank you, Miss Chicken. Ready to play some more? Great! Ovejita, bring in the next contestant. It's a tiger. Seems upset. Let's find out a little about what he's feeling. Mr. Tiger, can you give us a clue into how you're feeling?
I dropped my ice cream cone, and I kind of have a yucky feeling.
Yucky feeling?
And I can't stop crying.
Okay, it's a yucky feeling, and he can't stop crying. Do you know how the tiger is feeling? Sad? You think the tiger is sad? Let's find out. Mr. Tiger, are you sad?
Yeah, I'm sad. Thank you for helping me name my emotion.
We did it! We named that emotion! Great job!
Oh dear,
It's a pigeon.
Oh dear, oh no.
She seems like something's wrong. Can you tell us, Miss Pigeon, what are you feeling right now?
Well, I'll try, Murray. See, tomorrow I gotta fly south, and I ain't never been there before, see?
Uh-huh.
I don't know if they're gonna have the bird seed that I like there.
Okay.
See? And I got this queasy feeling in my tummy. Oh dear, oh dear. Oh,
Okay,
oh.
she's got a queasy feeling. She doesn't know how it's gonna go.
No, I don't.
What do you think the pigeon is feeling?
Oh dear.
Do you think she's anxious? Let's find out. Miss Pigeon, are you feeling anxious?
That's it, Murray. I'm feeling anxious. Oh, thank you for helping me to name my emotion.
Okay, I don't know how many kids know the anxious emotion, but stay here, stay here. Okay, so on the one hand, counselors sometimes say that feelings are neither right nor wrong. They're just feelings. And that may be true as long as we do not act on those feelings. It's not wrong to feel angry or sad or lonely or even anxious, but it may very well be wrong to let those feelings control how we act. I quoted my friend Tim Woodruff, who has a degree in counseling as well as religious studies, and he pointed out that it is easier to act your way into a better way of feeling than to feel your way into a better way of acting. It won't help to add guilt feelings to your emotions. That's true, but it also does not help to simply name your emotions and stop there. In fact, reading the Psalms and other scripture or coming to church to listen to encouragement in the songs and lessons and words of encouragement from others is often the best next step after naming your emotions. We can't let our inner enemies or our external enemies tell us what we can and cannot do. And that's why it is so important for us to avoid judging each other, and especially when we're together. We are here to encourage each other and to do love, to encourage each other to go on to do love and good deeds. If you can possibly pull yourself out of your depression, for example, enough to just do something for someone else, that is the most effective way to help combat those negative feelings. Maybe you can't do it on your own. Maybe you need a lot more help before you can do that. But if you can do that, that's the most effective way to help combat any kind of negative feelings. So this week we are going to start into book 2 of the Psalms, which starts at Psalm 42. And so let's go there just real quickly before we look a little more closely at Psalm 46. But this one starts with a very good emotion. Psalm 42, from the director of music, a maskil of the sons of Korah. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Now those lines have a familiar ring to them, don't they? We just sang them, in fact. So kids, you can be dismissed at this point, and Brenda will carry on with her planned lessons, or lesson. Okay. So before those lines, there is a name that might sound familiar, but not in a good way. Actually, you might even say that on a scale of 1 to 10, that name could put the emotion of fear at about an 11. Could these sons of Korah possibly be the descendants of the Korah who led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness? Well, let's see. Well, first let's review the event back in Numbers 16 and remind ourselves why that's a good question. Why would sons of Korah be around after this? Korah, son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and certain Reubenites became insolent and rose up against Moses. With them were 250 Israelite men, well-known community leaders who had been appointed members of the council. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" Skipping on down, Moses said to Korah, "Now listen, you Levites." Korah was among the Levites. "Isn't it enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near himself to do the work at the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the community and to minister to them?" And then skipping further on down, then Moses said, "This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, and it was not my idea. If these men die a natural death," he's speaking of Korah and those rebelling with him, "and suffer the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me." But if the Lord brings about something totally new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them with everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the realm of the dead, then you will know that these men have treated the Lord with contempt. As soon as he finished saying all this, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them and their households and all those associated with Korah, together with their possessions. They went down alive into the realm of the dead. With everything they owned, the earth closed over them, and they perished and were gone from the community. The fire came out from the Lord, and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. The next day, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Can you believe that? After this, you have killed the Lord's people, they said. It's amazing how blinded and foolish our emotions can make us. But when the assembly gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron and turned toward the tent of meeting, suddenly the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron went to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord said to Moses, "Get away from this assembly so I can put an end to them at once." And they fell face down. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put incense in it, along with burning coals from the altar, and hurry to the assembly to make atonement for them. Wrath has come out from the Lord. The plague has started." So Aaron did as Moses said and ran into the midst of the assembly. The plague had already started among the people, but Aaron offered the incense and made atonement for them. He stood between the living and the dead, and the plague stopped. But 14,700 people died from the plague, in addition to those who had died because of Korah. So the earth opened up and swallowed them and their households. So we might assume that Korah's story ends there. There will be no descendants to carry on his name, for better or worse. Well, apparently some of Korah's family were not there to be swallowed up by the earth. Look at Numbers 26, where the genealogies of the Jewish tribes are recorded. When they rebelled against the Lord, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, Dathan and Abiram, along with Korah, whose followers died when the fire devoured the 250 men, and they served as a warning sign. The line of Korah, however, did not die out. Well, there's a little more to add to this amazing history. The story of the birth of Samuel, the prophet and priest that we saw so much when we were looking at King Saul's story. Look at where Samuel came from. There was a certain man from Ramathaim, whose name was Elkanah. He had two wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. So you probably remember that story. God answered the very emotional prayers of Hannah when she promised to give her child back to service in God's temple if he would just give her a child. And so God gave her Samuel, and she took Samuel to the temple to serve the high priest Eli when he was weaned. And look at where Samuel came from. The descendants of Kohath, Amminadab his son, Korah his son. And then it lists 15 generations in between. And then Elkanah his son, and Samuel his son. So, Samuel is certainly one of the key men of God in the story of the Israelites. And although he was not able to raise good sons, there is no stain on Samuel himself, at least morally, which puts him actually in a very small club. Almost all of the Jewish heroes had major moral failures or failures of rebellion, but not Samuel. So why am I spending so much time making this connection clear? Well, Americans have kind of shed the idea of the importance of ancestry, right? Probably going back to the revolution against King George, who was ruler not because he earned the position or was chosen by the people, but because of his ancestry. Well, now that we have Ancestry.com and other such programs, at least one member of the family tends to get interested, right? After they retire and have nothing better to do. But we don't take it very seriously even then, even when they follow their ancestry. Our family is kind of proud to have Mark Twain in our family tree, along with a member of the Constitutional Convention that wrote the Constitution of Texas. But we don't really think that that makes us special. Well, ancestry is clearly very important in the Old and New Testaments. In fact, there are 25 different lists of genealogies. 25. But I think that I can make a pretty good case that the main point of all of those records is not as much to show what good and impressive people were in the bloodlines, but more to tell how we all need redemption. And God is the one who provides that. In other words, we are not saved or made worthy of being saved by who is in our bloodlines. We are made worthy only by God, who brings the best things from the worst sources. Well, Korah being named as an ancestor of the sons of Korah, who were responsible for some wonderful psalms, and likely were the worship leaders of their day. This is a striking example of this reality. So as we read the very humble and self-aware expressions of faith in Psalm 46, think about how it must have felt to carry the name of Korah through your life. But don't think that they redeemed their name by being holier than everyone else in their own generation. It was the opposite. They were made holy by humbling themselves and by doing what their ancestor Korah failed to do. He did not humble himself, and they trusted in God rather than in themselves. So let's go to another psalm of the sons of Korah. For the director of music of the sons of Korah, according to Alamoth, a song, probably Alamoth was the tune that was well known. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging, we will not fear. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, and she will not fail. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice. The earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. So let's bear in mind that most of these psalms were not written after Jerusalem had been destroyed along with the temple. And many of the most talented and skilled Jews were, then in exile in Babylon. They were usually written in response to something happening in the lives of the psalmists at some point in history before the exile happened, before Jerusalem and the temple of God's were destroyed and God's people no longer really had a nation as such. And so we've seen how the Psalms were written as a way of practicing their religion without a temple. Or they were compiled. They had already been written, but they were compiled while they were in exile. So some believe that this one was actually written, though, after a really great event in their history, when God had granted a great victory by scaring the army of Sennacherib literally to death, by causing them to hear the sounds of a massive army in the night, and in their confusion they killed each other, leaving the Jews and Jerusalem intact that time. But even if that is what inspired the words of this psalm, and you can kind of see that in it, how were the Jews who were now, as they were trying to worship God in Babylon without a walled city for protection and without a temple for worship, And without the pride of being a nation, how are they supposed to feel the same emotions that were expressed in this song? Well, the first and last and middle lines of the psalm say it all. The city walls are not our fortress. God is our fortress. That first line also includes the term ever-present. And this is what we must remember when we're tempted to make it all about our feelings. If we've ever asked the question, where is God in all of this? Or we've even felt abandoned by God, then we've actually lost our grip on reality. Because God is. God is ever present means that He is everywhere all of the time. We cannot escape His presence, and He cannot leave us. We will see that emotional sense of abandonment expressed in many of the Psalms of Lament. But it is not God who comes and goes. It is our emotions that are up and down. And that is not reality. God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. So that is our first takeaway. God is always with us. He is ever-present everywhere. Our emotions change all over the place, but God does not. His actions may be different according to what we really need most. Not what we think we need most, but what we really need most. But His love is always the same. The next line is, therefore we will not fear, and that leads to another takeaway, and that is that fear is not rational. Fear is understandable. Some of the things we're facing today just seem to be so beyond our control, and they are. We can do some things to lessen our impact, for example, on climate change. And we should, if we know that what we do will not do more harm than good. But how much control do we really have? How much knowledge do we really have? And we can do some things to protect ourselves and others from COVID-19 and other health threats, and we should. But in my personal observations, I've seen that those who have been the most careful seem to be affected as much, sometimes more, than anyone else. So why is fear irrational? Well, because God is always with us, and He does care, and He will take the best actions at the best times. Now, this does not mean that we neglect our part. He puts us in positions of responsibility. And that is a very important part of how He cares for all creation. So we take things very seriously, and we look for what He gives us to do for our world, for ourselves, for others. But then we trust Him even when we can't see whatever else He is doing that's outside of our responsibilities. How does fear of anyone or anything other than fear of God help? The only constructive fear is fear of God. And this leads into our next takeaway. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall, He lifts His voice, the earth melts. This reminds us that politics are a shadow. A shadow is not a real thing. It is evidence of a real thing. The powers of the political forces of this world are as transparent as the promises that they make. We can do some things to reduce the harmful effects of radical swings in our culture. We can vote, we can campaign, we can even run for office, but how much control do we really have? Well, we can and should make a bigger impact than anyone might think we could make. We should believe that. I mean, how many of us really believe that Roe versus Wade would ever be overturned? I have to admit that I did not. Especially not with the assistance of a president who seemed to have very few religious convictions. We'll give God the credit, but some of our votes played a part in that, right? And yet, abortions go on, and they will likely increase dramatically in states like ours, where they will remain legal. So people will bring their abortion businesses here, and people will come here to use them. That's the way politics work. At best, laws laws are made with good intentions, but there are always unintended consequences. And sometimes they make things worse instead of better. Often there is even intended deception and targeting others to do harm. Well, Jesus and Paul and Peter all walked this line and told us to walk this line, but also told us not to cross it. Jesus was asked whether it was right to pay taxes to the Roman government. He said, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." Paul took this to mean, or took all of Jesus' actions and attitudes, but probably these words, to mean what he says at a time when Christians were persecuted by the government. "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good." They are God's servants. Really? Well, Peter said it this way: "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people." Politicians and governing authorities of all kinds may believe that their authority comes from the Constitution, or from the voters, or from the government, but they are wrong. They are in their positions of responsibility because God assigned them a job, no matter how it seems they got there. So unless their rulers or their rules or laws require direct disobedience to God's moral laws, we must obey them. If they are immoral and corrupt, the leaders, then they will have to answer to God for that. If they think that they can get by with using their positions to corrupt God's creation, they will one day be held accountable. Their power is subject to God. And that power includes military power. Another line from the psalm, "He makes wars cease to the ends of the world." This means that wars are not the answer. Now, the power to go to war is just like any other power that can be morally used in submission to God or used immorally to oppress and control and murder innocent people. Now, of course, we don't understand how any of the evil things that occur in this world can be allowed to continue as a part of God's plan. We just don't understand it, never will. But we can know that they will not go on forever. Everything is subject to God's judgment. But wars do not continue indefinitely, even in this world. So all of Psalm 46 is in the voice of the narrator, except for these words, which are spoken by God himself. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." So one final takeaway, and that is that we must wait. We had a friend who did not like indecision, and we would be trying to decide where to go for lunch or some other momentous decision, and she would say, "Well, let's do something even if it's the wrong thing." Well, of course, she was kidding, but her line summarizes the problem with never being still or never allowing silence. All of our confusion and challenging the way things are is mostly answered by timing. See, it's not about whether God will make things right, it's a matter of when. And we have to make timing choices ourselves as well. That passage in Ecclesiastes speaks mostly to our own choices as to timing. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. We need to recognize the times to be silent and learn to listen for God's answers and to be okay with God not answering at that time. If we think we always have to know the answer, then we will end up putting words into God's mouth. We'll make up the answers and we'll say this is God's answer. Well, God says, be still and know that I am God. This is just an aside. Being still may call for us to turn off our phones and our radios and our televisions and our computers and even conversations and books. At least a part of every day might be best spent in silence. Go for a walk. Just sit on the porch. Some kind of nature, is probably best if you have access to it. But that first, middle, and last assurance is the beginning, middle, and end of our faith. The God of Jacob is our fortress. It's in verses 7 and 11. And that's just an abbreviated way of repeating verse 1. God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble.